One of the hallmarks of every dictatorship is dehumanization. You turn them from being people who you can work with, even if you don't agree with them, into those who are worthless.
Hi, y'all. I'm Morgan Fairchild. And I am Catherine Hart. And we're sisters. And welcome to our new podcast, Two Bitches from Texas. It's the show where we just sit around bitching with our friends about how to save the world. So today, we're going to talk to someone who has spent his entire career basically inside the machinery of democracy. That sounds scary. And he, watching how it works and watching it break and watching us argue with each other like, was it ever even real? I'm depressed myself, Morgan. Can you?
No, don't. Go on.
The idea that you will not give the other side anything means that you ignore corruption, you ignore murder, because if you call those things out, you're giving aid and comfort to the enemy.
Norm Ornstein is a political scientist, a longtime scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, and the foremost expert on Congress, polarization, voting rights, and institutional collapse in this country.
I believe fervently in equal opportunity, but there's nothing equal when some people start 25 yards ahead of the starting blocks and others start 25 yards behind.
He has been right about so many things that I wish he had not been right about. Okay, Norm, welcome to Two Bitches from Texas.
I am delighted to be with two queens.
Thank you. Thank you, honey.
And if you want to be called queen bitches, that's okay with me too.
I would like to be called
like that.
Queen bitch.
Yeah. And I just have to say, Morgan and I have been friends for a long time. We met a long time ago, actually here in Washington for something for the Hollywood Women's Political Caucus. And we just bonded. And we bonded in part because Morgan is so damn smart and knows so much about so much, but also, of course, is just a spectacularly wonderful human being. And not to mention that this great talented actress. And it is wonderful to see that her sister is smart and funny and as beautiful as Morgan is, which is saying something.
Thank you.
You're so
Very
kind,
kind.
Norm. But I'm bigger and meaner, but she's smarter, okay?
She is bigger and meaner.
I am.
Well, these days, bigger and meaner work.
Exactly.
Are requirements.
Yeah, we want to get bigger and meaner all the time.
My first protest was with John Lennon at Times Square, and I have not stopped since, so I'm out there.
So, Norm, listen, you have been studying Congress and the American institutions for decades now. And when you look at where we are right now and what's happening in Minnesota and what feels most broken to you, and when do you think it actually started?
So I am a Minnesotan, and this is personal.
Wow.
And it is even more painful as I watch basically my city in a war zone, and where the people, if we think of it as a war zone, the occupiers are committing war crimes on a daily basis, violating the law, violating every norm, violating the Constitution. It's even more dismaying when you realize the family of Renee Good released the autopsy that they were able to conduct on her body. And it's actually even a little bit of a surprise to me that they got access to the body.
Yeah, me
And
too.
what becomes clear is that the first two shots, first one through the windshield, hit her arm, another one hit her torso. It was the third shot while Ross, the murderer, was far away from the car, nowhere near where they were, firing through the driver's side window into her brain that murdered her. So that makes it even more, and of course, he then followed by saying, as we now know, and the voice has been identified by others who knew it, referring to the woman he had just murdered, fucking bitch. You'll pardon the language, but that's what he said. And then he sauntered away. So I do a podcast as well, as so many of us do, called Words Matter. And on that podcast, I showed my little finger, which you can see has that little thing there. And I said, oh, I have internal bleeding. which
And
is
you
what
did.
serial liars at the Department of Homeland Security said about Jonathan Ross to try to make the case that he had been injured. And of course, we had Trump saying he was run over and almost killed. He not only walked away, but after they claimed he had internal bleeding, suggesting a serious injury, the next day he moved out of his house carrying heavy stuff. So this is just a set of lies, but that's only one small part of what they're doing there. And that it may not be the worst part. The problem for both of you, for all of us, is that there are so many horrible things that it's hard to do a hierarchy of them. We have a president who has blown up our alliance that has made the world stable and prosperous for 80 years and done for the Russians and the Chinese the shredding of NATO and the alliance with our longtime democratic small d allies, what they didn't have to pay anything to make
Yeah.
happen. We know Trump drew back from the threat to use military force against our allies, against our treaty with NATO, because the stock market plummeted, and he cares about that. That's maybe all that he cares about. And then, announced proudly that he had the framework of a deal. Well, this is a guy who didn't even read The Art of a Deal, much less write it. And the deal that presumably is going to be on the table is the same deal that we had before he blew this all up in this ridiculous effort. You look at the breakup of the world order, the unhinged speech he gave at Davos, including, pissing all over our allies, Macron and others, and, claiming that he was going to impose heavy tariffs on pharmaceuticals coming from Europe so that he could bludgeon them into raising their prices, which of course would mean nothing about reducing our prices except
Exactly.
increasing them because of all the important medications that come from Europe. And in the absence of everything else, you would say, that's the worst thing I can imagine. But we know that we've got mayhem across the country. And we know, circling back to your first question, one of many rants I will do today, I am sure.
Rant on, honey,
that
rant on.
that the guardrails that the framers put in place, because they knew there was always a danger of getting a dictator, have failed us, starting with Congress. And you're right, both of you. I wrote a book, co-authored a book with my longtime partner in writing, Tom Mann, and in activities in 2006, 20 years ago, called The Broken Branch. Congress was failing us at that point. Then we wrote It's Even Worse Than It Looks in 2012, making it clear that the problem was the Republican Party careening out of control. And it's gotten so much worse than I could have imagined. And the fact is, even the less than a handful of Republicans in the House and Senate who push back in even the slightest fashion, as weak as they could possibly be, the idea that the hero that we would have here, the one most speaking truth to power in the Republican elected ranks, is Thomas Massie, who is one of the most radical right-wing figures we have ever seen, tells us an awful lot. And when I see Tom Tillis, the senator from North Carolina, who is retiring because he can't take this anymore, goes to Davos, and when asked, well, if Trump does get into a shooting war with our NATO allies in Greenland, would you impeach him? And he said, no, I don't think we want to go to impeachment. I'll introduce a war powers resolution. Ooh, that'll stop him. That's what we're dealing with here. And then, of course, we have a Supreme Court that has unleashed all of this. We could go back decades into the pathologies here, but if I'm starting with living figures who are villains here, I start with Newt Gingrich, and then I go to Mitch McConnell, and then I turn to John Roberts. Put those three together, and they are as responsible for the mayhem we're undergoing, the deaths that have occurred, 700,000 around the globe because of what Trump and Doge and Marco Rubio did by blowing up AID, or well over 400,000 children unnecessarily dead, murdered as a consequence of this. And none of this would have happened if it weren't for Newt, Mitch, and John Roberts.
Well, I remember when Newt was starting that, where his rule was that you're not supposed to talk to the other side, and that the other side is demons, as opposed to a relationship that you need for a functioning democracy. I remember when all of that started and thinking this is not going to end well. So
Yeah. I remember, what it used to be like, because we're two old farts here. It used to be like you argued and you debated, and you got angry even, and then you all decided what would be best. What do I have to give up? But we're all so tribal now. Do you see any way back from just everybody saying it's my way or the highway? That's not a democracy. We have to fight about stuff and compromise. Do you see any way back?
Yeah. Catherine, you said the secret word, tribal. I wrote a piece just a few weeks ago called The Cancer of Tribalism. And that's what Newt generated very deliberately. He wanted to turn from what was becoming a polarized political system, but one where, just as you said, people on opposite sides could still work together, even if they thought the others were wrong, but we knew what common problems were. You had Orrin Hatch and Ted Kennedy work together to give us children's health insurance protection.
Mhm.
Newt wanted to make it tribal. And tribal means you don't look at people on the other side as maybe misguided, but they're good people trying to solve the same problems that we are for the betterment of society, into they're evil and trying to destroy our way of life. And it is a cancer. And it spread from what Newt started in Washington out to the states and then to the public as a whole. And let's face it, the idea that you will not give the other side anything means that you ignore corruption, you ignore murder, you ignore sadism and cruelty, because if you criticize him, you're giving aid and comfort to the enemy. And how we get away from that, we have seen far too many societies that have divided along tribal lines, and it takes a very long time to move beyond that. What's interesting now is at least some of the people, even in his cult, because it's, morphed from just being tribal to being a cult, and Trump is the cult leader. Even some of those, because of economic conditions, because they see him breaking his promises that on day one, he'll end inflation, he'll give them prosperity, jobs will be everywhere. And they see what's happening and the disruption that's taking place. The small business owners who've loved Trump now losing their help and finding that their businesses are in turmoil and being crushed by tariffs. Some of them, they're not going to change their party. They're not going to change their attitude towards people that many of them call libtards, including some in government using those terms. But they're now seeing Trump a little bit as the emperor with no clothes, although the image of him without clothes. Yep.
Well, listen, any of us over 50, the image of not without clothes is not a good one. I remember, Norm, you were one of the very first people in one of your books there to say very plainly that one party was becoming a danger to democracy. And that is not something that scholars used to say out loud. When did you and Thomas decide that it was time to stop hedging on that and just say what was really going on?
When we did in 2006, the Broken Branch, we put blame on the leaders of both parties and on both parties, a little bit more on Republicans, because Denny Hastert, who had been the speaker at that point, we're turning the Congress away from what it was supposed to be, an independent body. He was completely a lieutenant to George W. Bush at that point. In the few years that followed, and particularly what we saw when Barack Obama got elected, and what we saw with total Republican intransigence, a belief that the way for them to recapture power was to vote against everything, even things that were in the interest of their own voters, much less in the interest of the country. Go out to the country and whip up people into a frenzy after the economic collapse in 2008 and into 2009, the creation of the Tea Party movement, the incitement of people by the so-called young guns then, Kevin McCarthy, Paul Ryan,
Cantor.
and Eric Cantor. And then what Mitch McConnell started to do as minority leader, which was to use the filibuster as a weapon of mass obstruction, just to block things, not because they've even in most cases cared. So there was judicial nominations or legislation. And so we decided that we had to be speaking truth to power. And so we basically called the Republican Party at that point an insurgent outlier, a party that was contemptuous of the norms and the rules and the laws and its opposition of truth and science and facts. And when we did the book, which I titled It's Even Worse Than It Looks, and I made it It's Even Worse Than It Looks because it always looks bad. The system like never with checks and balances and all of that, making policy is always going to be difficult. Politics were visual and they're not, easy to look at with favor. But this was, even if it looked bad, was worse than that. And when we wrote the book, we did an excerpt in the Washington Post Outlook section, the now long gone Outlook section, which allowed longer pieces. And our editor, Carlos Lozada, who's now the book editor at the New York Times, helpfully titled it, Let's Just Say It, The Republicans Are the Problem. That was the gist of the book, but it was blunt. And the pushback that we got was immense.
I bet.
Lots of people, including most of the reporters covering Congress and politics, didn't like it. They wanted to both sides everything, which continues to be the case. We condemned the press corps for doing just that, and I got pushback from them. We had all kinds of Republicans in Congress we'd worked with on many issues, reform issues, who were furious with us, while interestingly, Republicans out of office, large numbers of them said to us, thank you for trying to save our party from what it's become, which is not a problem-solving, reasonable party that cares about rules, norms, laws, or the Constitution.
Norm, can I interject something here? I'm speaking for myself, although my sister and I we speak a lot about a lot of stuff, science, politics, and everything together. I have always thought of myself as being a fair person. I like to listen to facts. I like to educate myself. I voted for Republicans. I voted for Democrats. I voted for independents. I have a local councilwoman right now who is Republican. I love her. She really does great stuff for our community. I always vote for her. And I wanted to point out to people because I don't want people to think, oh, it's all about the bad Republicans. We don't feel that way. I have done healthy debates with my dear old cousins for decades about the Republican idea and the Democrat. There's different ways to fix stuff. But we love each other. We have dinner afterwards. So we never say anything cruel or hateful to each other. So my politics, honestly, these days is just plain old kindness. Going out there and trying to do acts of kindness to someone to remind people, because it didn't used to be like that. And my heart is breaking right now as you're putting these labels on things that are labels I don't want to hear. But that doesn't mean they're not true.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart. I want our democracy.
Back in the 80s, I was lobbying in the 80s and 90s on the Hill for different things, including funding for AIDS research and different things. And it was just very different. I loved John McCain. I worked with McCain-Feingold to keep big money out of politics until Citizens United came along and screwed everything. But I've always worked with Republicans. But back then, if you could get in and you could make a case with facts to somebody, you might actually get a vote from them. And they did care about the public. They cared about their constituents. They cared what was good for their voters. that's one of the things I feel has been lost here is the tribal politics, the libtard is evil, that anything that comes up, they don't seem to care about their voters anymore. Right now, we're seeing farmers go bankrupt again, like they did in Trump's first term. The healthcare thing that has just been thrown out with all the healthcare costs going up, grocery prices going up, all of the small businesses going out of business because of tariffs that are unnecessary and are costing our economy. It's costing us our place in the world. And not to, again, I try not to be too partisan on the show here, but The Economist had their headline, America Economy, the Envy of the World. And we came back from the COVID pandemic better than any other country. And now, I mean, we're kind of in a shambles with our economy. And so it breaks my heart to see this again, because we care about people. I mean, I don't care what color of skin you have. I don't care what your gender is. I don't care about any of those things. You're a human being. We care about human beings. I don't know where that got lost. That just caring about other human beings and trying to make sure people have enough to eat and shelter and are taken care of, have health care if they're sick, and children, looking out for children instead of cutting off all the insurance. I don't understand where that mindset comes from.
There's a lot to unpack there. I will say on the latter front that one of the hallmarks of every dictatorship is dehumanization. You dehumanize those you view as your enemy. You turn them from being people who you can work with, even if you don't agree with them, into those who are worthless. And you could see this in the reaction to the murder of Renee Good, but we see it all over the place. And another piece I wrote a couple of months ago was on decency. We have relatives, neighbors, friends who are MAGA people.
Yeah.
If you put that aside, for many of them, they're people I would leave my dog with. I would leave a child with. I would trust if we had to go away to make sure the house was okay. They're decent people, and yet now they're forgetting in too many instances that decency because they're with the cult. And what we have to figure out, and that's true for all of us who care about both decency and democracy and human beings, how to uh, invoke the decency to get them to realize what we're dealing with here. All these Republicans I've worked with, many of whom are still there, I couldn't be in the same room with them now. And it's because and for many of them, if you transported them somehow back 30 years, they would still be admirable people working in the House and Senate to make a better country, whether we agreed with their slant on policies or not. And they cared about their own institutions and they cared about the rule of law.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's a combination of moral cowardice, and that's the main part of this, with just a willingness to abandon every value to stay in office, and also a cowardice built on a fear that if Trump turns on them and their families, they will be physically endangered. And that is very different from what we've seen. But, my feeling about this is if you are going to go there and vote and talk in ways that betray every value you have, betray your institution, betray your oath of office, betray fundamentals, get out. You should not be in that office.
Well, see, that's what I don't understand. Obviously, the founding fathers set up our democracy so that each branch would jealously guard their own power.
Yeah.
And that would be a check or balance on the other
Yeah.
branches. To see both houses of Congress just throw their power away is something I think they never thought of. And certainly I never thought of in the time I was lobbying and doing things, that they would just give it away and not stand up for their own prerogatives. I don't understand that. I mean, do you think this is like a failure of a leadership, or a failure of design, or just part of our culture now, or what?
It's a failure of fundamental human values. But if you heard the speaker, Mike Johnson, defending Trump on tariffs and saying he's exercising his Article 2 power on tariffs, there is zero Article 2 power on tariffs.
Could you explain to our listeners who might not know what Article 2 is, what
And
that is?
why it doesn't control tariffs? Because some
Yeah.
people won't know.
So I'll step back for a second here, too. When I would teach American government students, I would take them to the National Archives to show them the actual Constitution in its visual form. Why? Because when you look at the Constitution that way, multiple pages, Article 1 is the legislative branch. It's Congress. It gives all the details of the powers of Congress. One of those powers in the hands of Congress is taxing and tariffs. And back then, tariffs were the major form of taxation and revenue. Tariffs on goods coming in from other countries. Article 2 is the executive branch. It's half as long as Article 1. And it gives some powers to a president, but in every instance, the power that the president has is checked by the power of Congress. That includes making war or implementing policy, which has to be making sure that the laws that Congress passes are faithfully executed. He can veto Congress's bills. They can override the veto. He can't override the override. He cannot get rid of them. Their constituents are the only ones who can. They can impeach and remove a president from office. So it's pretty clear that while these are supposed to be co-equal branches in some way, that the first among equals is Congress. The third article, by the way, is about the judiciary. That is half as long as the second article about the presidency. It gives a very limited power to the Supreme Court. It only gives them an original jurisdiction that includes a few things. It's differences between the states, differences that might be involved with a foreign entity or country and the United States. And then it says Congress can give the court more power. And all the power that we've seen exercised, whether it is getting rid of campaign finance with Citizens United, getting rid of voting rights by spurning a bill that passed the Senate unanimously and the House 390 to 33, are powers that Congress gave to the court. But what this court is now saying is that there is a unitary executive. All the power is in the hands of one person, the president, who is immune from prosecution for those official acts, but also by saying you can't have independent regulatory commissions, that the president can fire all of those. This was Congress delegating authority in some areas and creating a balance, because these are powers that overlap in some respects, but so that the president could have a role. He would nominate people and Congress would have to confirm them, the Senate. But you could have a little more ability to deal with complex issues that a Congress simply can't do on a day-to-day basis. That's gone now. And there is nothing in Article 2 that gives a president power over tariffs. What we do have, for those listening, a little tutorial, there was a law that Congress passed that said if there's an immediate economic emergency in a short-term targeted way, the president may impose tariffs just because it's an emergency. When you say, as President Donald J. Trump just did, hey, if Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, does not give me $1 billion for my Council on Peace, where the money is going to go not towards peace, but most likely into a private account in Qatar, just like he's done with the Venezuelan oil. And if you don't give me that money, I'm going to impose 200% tariffs on French wines and champagne. You tell me how that's related to an economic emergency. And none of the tariffs that he's done are anything other than he said, he imposed tariffs against one country because he didn't like the way the prime minister talked to him. A woman, of course.
Yeah, she said she rubbed him the wrong way. Yeah.
I'm sorry, that lady gave him her Nobel Peace Prize and he still didn't give her country back. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think he's playing fair.
No, but the Congress is caving to all of this, the Republicans in Congress.
But why, Norm? Why do you think that is? I mean,
they just
we
scared?
all learned in school the three branches and the checks and balances.
Yeah.
Why do you think that they have failed? The checks and balances have failed to hold a president reined in. I mean, why are they not defending their own powers?
So I think, first of all, ever since Newt and all of the disputes that have taken place in Congress, and remember, many of the people he recruited to run and that were able to win the House in 1994, some of them moved on to the Senate. There's a good book called The Gingrich Senators because they poisoned the culture of the Senate as well with that tribal stuff. But filter all this through the prism of a cult. If you are in a cult, the power of that cult is the fear that you will be excommunicated or shunned by all of those who you now hold as your family, as a part of your
Okay.
own cult. And also, as we've seen with other cults, the fear of physical violence against you if you go against the cult. So, one example that I'll use on this front, Rob Portman, longtime senator from Ohio. Before that, incredible career, budget director in the White House, trade representative, smart, long time in the House. He was a bipartisan figure, very admirable guy in a lot of ways, goes all in on the cult, and then decides he's going to retire. So he's going to retire. He's not going to face those pressures anymore. He's not going to have to worry about getting another job. He's an independently wealthy family. He's going to go back to his home in Cincinnati where he'd been for most of his life, and he doesn't change. Not one iota, not one vote cast is different after he says, I'm leaving, because he's going to go back to Cincinnati and he'll go out and play golf with the foursome of his buddies. And then they'll go to the
Mhm.
clubhouse, have lunch. And at night, he and his wife and a few couples might go out to dinner at the club downtown. And the idea that you will be viewed as an apostate, that you will be shunned by your friends, that your life and your social life will disappear, in effect, I think had a lot to do with his failure to begin to put any check and balance in place. Other than the few people who did vote, and I'll give them credit, to impeach Trump after the insurrection, not enough to make the difference. And of course, Mitch McConnell kept that from happening. We would not have Donald Trump as president if they had followed through and convicted him and kept him from running again. So all of this mayhem would be in a different place. We might have had a Republican president. It might have been an awful president. It wouldn't be like this.
We would still have a democracy.
Yeah. But I also think that, in 1960, a political scientist named Donald R. Matthews wrote a seminal book called U.S. Senators and Their World. And he had a chapter on what he called the folkways of the Senate, the norms that guided the place, because the norms are as important as the laws and the rules and the Constitution. And one of them was institutional patriotism. It was this sense that the special nature of being a member of the Senate and the role that the Senate has and the oath that you take, that you're going to protect the prerogatives, whether it's your president from your party or the other president, you're going to do oversight. You're going to make sure the laws are faithfully executed. You're going to take care when people are corrupt. You're going to pass the laws that matter for the country.
Mhm.
It doesn't exist anymore for these people. What matters is the cult, and that's tragic and frightening at the same time.
Norm, can I ask you something about about hope, making it better. I read something that you wrote, I think not too long ago, and one of the things I love about you is that you're an educator. You really are. You're pretty pissed because your city's being destroyed, but you're an educator. To me, under everything else, you research, you learn, you teach other people, and I love that because it helps us. It helps us. You were writing, I didn't even know this is possible, about where Congress kind of started not representing the people. And I'm not talking about all the redistricting stuff that's going on right now. I'm talking about, I didn't know this, that we could actually change the number of representatives and senators, and it was meant to be changed.
It was. And
I
if
didn't
it,
know.
well, a whole lot of people don't. And that includes some people in office who think that the number 435 was a kind of magical constitutional number. The reality is the House started out with 65 members. The framers wanted the House to be so close to the people that they actually even thought about a 1-year term, not 2-year terms. And they thought about capping the size of a district at 15,000 people so that the representatives could be close to their own constituents. And of course, that wasn't going to last as the country grew. And every 10 years, when we do a census, they would adjust the size of the House to reflect the growth in population. And of course, they jigger the seats to fit the population of the different states. And that was true every 10 years until 1910, when they just didn't do anything. Now, why didn't they do anything? Because we had this huge influx of immigrants coming in through Ellis Island, and these were Irish and Italians mostly, and they were going to the Northeast and the Midwest, and then many of them would become citizens. And then we had a lot of the former slave families from the South moving to the North. Southern conservatives didn't want that power to go in that direction, so they
Right.
refused to enlarge the size of the House to reflect the fact that the populations of these northern states were growing. And they did the same thing after 1920. And then in 1929, before the 1930 census, and at that point the House was 435, they just capped it at where it was. That's why it's
Mhm.
435, and it's been that way now for over 100 years.
But it was meant to grow.
Yes, it was meant to grow. And what would they need to do
Yeah,
to grow it now? If they capped it, what would you do now?
you just pass a law. And what I had advocated, along with I'm part of a commission of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and we did a long report on this. If you add 150 members right now, it basically reflects the sort of jiggering that had to be done once it was capped at that size, but it also would fit the physical plant of the capital. And if you add 150 members, you go from districts that now average almost 800,000.
I would like to point out that you said that they thought about capping it at 15,000. I'm sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
And now it's 800,000.
Now it's 800,000. Former Representative Tom Davis, a Republican from suburban Virginia, once bragged that he believed in his years in office, before that local office and then in Congress, that he had knocked on every door in his district. And then he found out from a poll that only like 5% of the people in the district believed they'd ever met him. And that's just a reflection of the size of the place, but also people moving in and out and all of that.
Yeah.
And there's, the connection that's supposed to be there, the
Mhm.
individuals have to their own voters, has become disconnected. And this would not, eliminate that problem, but it would move the district size to around 500 and some thousand. So at least there would be something closer to what we would want, but it also makes it harder to do the gerrymandering.
Mhm.
The larger the districts are, the more you can move them around through all kinds of geographical areas. You look at the district around Austin,
I live
Texas,
in Texas.
you know, and there are a lot of other benefits that would come from it. The Senate's a little
So
different.
what would they have to do? Propose a law in the House and pass it?
A simple law was the law that capped it at 435. Doesn't take a constitutional change. A law that says we're going to enlarge the House by 150. And then
And
you'd
then
have
the
to
president
redraw
would
the
have to sign it?
president would have to sign it.
Mm.
Um, It's not going to happen in the near future, but it would help a lot. Now, I have a very different view of the Senate, which is the Senate, of course, was set up to represent states, and to get the Constitution done, they had to not just have it set so that every state would get 2 senators. And back then, by the way, the ratio of population between the largest and the smallest was about 10 to 1, 12 to 1. So it was still distorted, but not enormously so. But they put in another provision in another part of the Constitution guaranteeing equal representation for the states in the Senate. So it makes it a little harder to adjust.
Mhm.
But I wouldn't adjust that way. What I would do now, and to get around this, keep it with equal representation, I'd add like 25 senators, some elected nationally,
Ah,
some elected regionally, so that you actually can increase a representation in a way now, because states are so firmly red and blue that there are very few that have mixed representation.
mhm,
But it's also,
Mhm.
we have a big problem in the Senate, which is we have a population now that is not 10 or 12 to 1 from smallest to largest, but 70 to 1 and more. But
Whoa.
we're almost to the point where 70% of Americans live in just 15 states. That obviously includes Texas, it
mhm.
includes California and Illinois and Florida, many others. They're not all red states. But think about what that means for the Senate. It means that 30% of Americans will elect 70 senators, and they
Yeah.
don't represent the diversity of the country or the economic dynamism of the country. And it means that our votes increasingly will become much more detached from those representatives.
I think that a lot of people that I've talked to until this last year, I'm glad to see that, people are saying, gee, I want to vote. I want to get out there. I want to educate myself more so than I've ever seen. But I understand why people just go like, what does it matter? Because they don't feel like they're represented. And I think this sounds like actually a really smart plan. Obviously, it's going to be difficult, but to try and change things a little bit. We do want change in our country. Change is good,
Yeah.
but we need to do it legally, and we need to do it decently, and we need to do it in a way that it puts more democracy instead of less. So I think this sounds like really very interesting. I'd never even heard that theory before. So now I have to think about that too. Thanks, Norm.
Well, and just recently you sat down with Martin Luther King III and talked
Sure.
about
Ooh.
Louisiana versus Calais, which is the Supreme Court case that would maybe reshape voting rights in the country. Can you talk about that? Because there was an opinion piece or piece in the New York Times that I found fascinating just about voting rights, because I continually am surprised at how many people don't know about voting rights, don't know about 1965, don't know about civil rights, especially young people, and don't understand really what's at stake with voting rights in some of this new legislation and these new cases.
I've long been on the board of something called the Drum Major Institute. It was actually started in the early 1960s by Martin Luther King Jr. and his then legal counsel, Harry Wachtell, as an avenue to try and, because he was a drum major for decency and rights, to try and
Hmm.
protect those things. And it got re-energized in the 90s. And Martin Luther King III is the chairman of the board, and Martin's wife, Andrea, is the president of it, and I'm on the board. And I said at a board meeting a few months ago, we're going to have this case coming up and nobody knows about it. And it's not going to get any attention until they actually make a ruling, and then it's too late anyhow. And we need to use the Martin Luther King holiday as an avenue for spreading the word about this threat to our voting rights and to democracy that's coming up for decision anytime now by the Supreme Court. So we did this piece, and they changed it into a dialogue, but gave it, prominent display, which was terrific. And here's the reality. The Voting Rights Act was Martin Luther King Jr.'s, was the heart of his legacy. It's what he fought for more than anything else. We ended up getting it. LBJ was a little reluctant to move forward because he didn't think he'd have the votes for it after passing the first Civil Rights Act in 1964. There is, by the way, a movie that got very little attention by, this might make me cry, by Rob Reiner,
Oh.
on LBJ and centered around this.
Mhm.
Woody Harrelson, of all people, actually played a very credible LBJ.
I saw that, yeah.
But he turned to Martin Luther King and said, "You want this done now, you're gonna have to get the votes or help us get the votes." And it was the bloody march across the Edmund Pettus Church that changed enough that they could get the votes, and let's give credit in some ways to where it's due, with the help of Everett Dirksen, the Republican leader in the Senate, Bill McCulloch, who was a very conservative Republican House member from Ohio. They wanted decency and voting rights for everybody, and that got it over the top. It went through 5 revisions over time because the main provisions protecting voting, and a lot of this obviously because of the Jim Crow rules in the South, that they would have these provisions that would expire after 5 years, and then they'd have to renew them. And the last revision that was made actually was going to extend those protections for 25 years so that it could really be in place. It passed the Senate unanimously. It passed the House. The major figure there was another conservative Republican, actually a pretty brutish guy named Jim Sensenbrenner, who was offended by what he saw was happening. 390 to 33 in the House.
You don't get that on anything.
No.
Yeah.
So one key provision there was in what was Section 5 of this Voting Rights Act, which was called preclearance. And what it did was, and it had been there for some time, it said, we're going to take the worst cases of voter suppression, Jim Crow laws, discrimination, and those areas, localities, counties, states, if they're going to change their voting rules, they have to pre-clear the changes that they want to do with the Justice Department, which can vet them to see if they fit within the Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court, and they basically kept the same jurisdictions that had been the worst offenders when they did this revision. John Roberts, who had made it clear for years that he didn't like the Voting Rights Act, that he viewed it as a kind of reverse racism, that the way to get rid of racism is to stop things that are favorable to one race over another. It was a crazy, distorted view of what these things were. And the rationale for taking away any enforcement from the preclearance provisions was, well, look at all of these places. They don't discriminate anymore, so we don't need it.
Yeah.
And Ruth Bader Ginsburg had a very famous analogy in her dissent. And she said, this is like saying you're in a torrential rainstorm and an umbrella is over your head and you're saying, well, I don't need this anymore. I'm not feeling any rain.
Yeah.
Texas, your Texas, the same day that that decision came out, passed a draconian voter suppression, Jim Crow type law, as did so many others of these jurisdictions.
I'm not proud of that.
Did not change John Roberts at all. What he did say as he got enough votes to do this in a decision called Shelby County, for Shelby County, Alabama, one of the worst offenders, was, well, we're taking away preclearance because the formula is outdated and these are not the problem areas anymore, but we're keeping Section 2. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act said that if voters feel discrimination, they can sue under the Voting Rights Act to have the districts redrawn to ameliorate the problem. And that's been used. It's much more unwieldy, obviously, but it's been used over and over again. It was used in Louisiana to create a second majority-minority district because Black voters in Louisiana had been screwed. A group of white voters tried to turn it on its head by taking a case to the Supreme Court now that said we were being discriminated against by the creation of these districts, and that's what they're taking up. And if you, and the oral argument there makes it pretty clear that they have at least 5 votes. They're probably going to do a sneaky thing, not say there's no more Section 2, which would be an outrage given that Congress passed it and it's been in existence for 50 years.
Unanimous. It's almost unanimous every year.
What they're going to say is, well, we're going to keep Section 2, but the only ones who can bring a case are the Justice Department, not the voters themselves, which with Pam Bondi, of course, means. And what it means is if they do this decision soon enough, we're going to lose probably 30% or more of the Black Caucus. We're going to lose a number of the Hispanic members from Texas because every one of these states is going to change their districts again.
Like that.
The second time in the midterm to take advantage of what the court is doing because there's no recourse for it. And it'll be a deep, deep blow to not just to voting rights, but the prospects of an election actually working in 2026.
Well, see, I think this is very important for our listeners to understand. It's not with a bang, but a whimper. It's the slow eroding of your rights. Especially of minorities of any kind, but the slow whittling away. It's not one big sledgehammer. It's a slow whittling away of all the voting rights that we have taken for granted our entire lives. I mean, or most of our lives because we're old, but young people have taken for granted their whole lives that these were just American facts, that you had the right to vote and that, it would be fairly tabulated and fairly apportioned and, not all this gerrymandering and rigging of everything. I think it's important for our listeners because a lot of people don't understand this, of how it's happening. It's happening almost by stealth mode, a slow whittling away. And then one morning you wake up and you don't have any rights anymore.
That's right. And people feel overwhelmed and then it's too much stuff and they can't. That's exactly what they want. It's too much stuff and I can't understand that. That's why I love you, because you just explained this very succinctly and simply so that people go, I can wrap my head around that. I can understand that. And I really think that one of the things that I personally think we can do is to try to make sure that people are more educated in a simple way, and you do that. You really help people to understand. Like I read that from you and I think that I, keep myself pretty educated. I had no earthly idea that we could change the size of the Congress. And it didn't even occur to me that we could do that. And I'm like, wow, that's nice to know.
Well, I did know that, but being reminded of it is important. But, we've been talking for a while. I don't want our time to run out with you. Before I have a chance to talk to you about something I know is very dear to your heart, what many people may not know is that you lost your son, Matthew, several years ago, and that you and Judy and your family, Daniel, instead of just giving in to grief, you turned it into something really remarkable, and that you guys were just honored recently by Washingtonian magazine about being Washingtonians of the Year for creating the Matthew Harris Ornstein Debate Institute. Is that it? And you have a new documentary coming. Please talk to people about taking grief and turning it into something where you have changed so many young people's lives.
Thank you for bringing it up. So Matthew was a national champion high school debater. And after he died, actually right afterwards, Joe Biden, then vice president, called up and spent an hour on the phone from his vice presidential office with me and my wife, Judy, and our son, Daniel. And one of the things that he talked about, as he's done with many, many others, is you need to turn grief to purpose. You either crawl up into a fetal position when you lose a child, that's true of many loved ones, or you try to do something to make the legacy meaningful. We talked to his high school debate partner, his best friend, Alex Berger, and Alex is very deeply involved with the Los Angeles. He's now a successful screenwriter and television writer. The Los Angeles Urban Debate League, which is public school kids who otherwise would not have the resources. For Matthew and Alex to compete at the national level and to win the biggest tournaments, they had to have a lot of resources, which we were able to provide. That included Matthew spent 2 summers at the University of Michigan, which has a summer institute for the highest level debaters, 7 weeks, 7 days a week. It's policy debate, one topic a year, and you immerse yourself in the substance, but also the different techniques that you can use for the rounds and the ways in which you go about it. You have to amass an enormous amount of literature, all of those things. And it wasn't cheap. And public school kids from, poorer areas don't have that ability, and they aren't able to compete. So we created a summer camp, summer institute for public school kids, free. We started with 30, and there was not much of a debate culture in Washington. What had been the Washington Urban Debate League was pretty much moribund. And it was open to anybody, all free. And it was, we ask only one thing, which is you go back to your school after this and try and form a debate team, and we'll try and get something going. This past summer, we had over 270 kids
Wow.
from rising 6th graders, 5th graders, 10-year-olds through high school. 2 weeks for the novices and the junior varsity, 3 weeks for the varsity kids. And it's just remarkable. These are mostly Title I schools, which is schools where the majority of kids qualify for free breakfast and lunch until they take it away. In this
Yeah,
administration.
exactly.
That's another
and-
podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
85% minority kids. And it gives them life skills, tools that they can use throughout their life, speaking in front of others, learning how to do research, how to write, how to sort out fact from misinformation and disinformation, because you're judged by the number of assertions that you make that have to be accompanied by a piece of evidence. And if it's false evidence, you'll get docked for it. And our kids have a 100% graduation rate. These are all from the Washington area, mostly from the District of Columbia, the more blue-collar county, Prince George's County. We have a few now from Baltimore, which had lost its own urban debate league. And virtually all who want to go to college get a scholarship because the colleges know that these kids are better prepared and more likely to succeed than any others. And we end the camp with a tournament and an awards ceremony. And I always say to them, I believe fervently in equal opportunity, but there's nothing equal when some people start 25 yards ahead of the starting blocks and others start 25 yards behind. And our whole goal here is to get you up to those starting blocks. We have kids who are absolutely brilliant when you give them the tools. And what pains me is knowing how many brilliant kids there are out there where that brilliance will not show itself because they won't have those tools. So we did this documentary. It's called Immutable. It will air on public television on March the 6th, which is National Speech and Debate Day. We're taking it to many places around the country to try and spread the notion of building debate, which is in a tribal environment, Catherine, going back to one of the things we talked about earlier. These kids, when they go into a debate round, don't know if they're going to argue the affirmative or the negative. And they have to, in many instances, argue vigorously for something that's just anathema to them. And that puts you in the minds and finding an understanding for people who do believe that. And it means you can argue even better when you don't like it, but they have to do it civilly, and they are going to be leaders in this next generation. So we want to spread this, especially now, the 250th year of the country's founding, to try and, over time, recapture that sense of what we need to bind the country back together again.
Well, I love the concept of civility, and debate prepares you so much because it's facts and logic and civility and just making a good argument. And then, you win or you lose. And that's what Congress should be. If you can pull people over to your side where you're presenting your facts, that's what the vote should be. So I just think this is brilliant, and I love what you're doing for these kids. Catherine, go ahead.
I'm just going to add to that, I still believe Speaking of Martin Luther King and everyone else who has said this, that the arc of the moral universe is definitely long, but it does always and forever bend towards justice. And
Just needs a
this
little
is
help.
Norm, you are helping to bend it. And this is what we do, guys. We individually can do what we can do. You can be nice to your neighbor. You're not just a person that goes out there and just yells at people. And that doesn't help anything. Guys, don't go out and just get angry and yell at people. It really doesn't. No one listens to you anyway when you do that. But you care, and you are just, and you are decent, and you're smart. And by God, you can do something with that, or whatever you have, really.
We can all
you
do
know?
something with that, and it's up to all of
You
us.
can
I
keep
think,
going, Catherine.
I think
And you're
it's
the
up to all.
handsomest man that's ever been on our podcast, Norm.
Yeah.
And we love
somehow
you.
I doubt that.
But I think that decency, coming back to the decency and the kindness, and that we seem to have lost as a society, but trying to get that back, recognizing that in other people that we may disagree with, and finding that connection again to the decent human being in each other is one of the most important things. We've got to get our democracy back.
I've got to plug you one more time. What is the name of your documentary that's coming up in March?
It's called Immutable, and the first two letters, I am, are actually crossed out. And the reason that it's called that, the real heroes of this movie, which is heartwarming and inspirational, we follow some of these kids over 3 years. The single moms are the heroes. And one of these single moms, who's actually now going through a bout of breast cancer, but she's an amazing
Yes.
human being, 2 kids who've done the debate. And they live in a neighborhood that's not great. Kids get shot there. One of their kids' friends got murdered there. With the debate stuff, they sometimes have to stay at school after dark, and she's shared the death of them walking from all different kinds of threats. But she said, I want my kids to believe that their futures are not immutable, that just because of where they live and what they don't have, that's going to define their lives. And so we took that as the title, and her kids, one of them who's now a freshman at Howard University, is absolutely spectacular and incredibly poised. I'll just say as we end, we bring these 10-year-olds in, 5th graders, and they've never spoken in front of anybody in their lives. And 3 days in, they're getting up there and they're really going at it. And what you find is they get their voices.
Oh, God.
And once they get their voices, and once they realize the power that they have with their voices, it transforms their lives. And all the research that's been done on the debaters, it's not just that we have a 100% graduation rate where the norm for the others is about 60%. It's that as you follow them after they leave, it sticks with them. It defines their ability to succeed in life. And we're probably going to have 300 kids this summer. We have 40 to 50 instructors. The vast
Wow.
majority of them are alumni of our program. They go and then they come back to teach. And a significant share of the kids we have are siblings who've seen their brothers and sisters do this and see what happens to them. And they say, I want to do that as well. It builds on itself. And again, you think of what we do as a society when we take the brilliance out there, the talents out there, and don't
Mhm.
give them the tools. And it reminds me in a way of what we see in places like Afghanistan, where they take half the population, which is the brightest half of the population, and say, no, you're not going to play any role in this society. And where are they as a society? Poor, struggling, and the number of people that we have in this society who could contribute so much more. It's not just that their lives are not enriched the way they should be, it's that the society isn't. And until we can find the tools to get everybody up to that starting block place, we're not going to be what we could be.
Yeah,
Bless you for
exactly.
that. Bless you,
Yeah.
bless you, bless you.
Is it on PBS March 6th?
It'll be on PBS on March the 6th.
Mm-hmm.
And if people go to immutablefilm.com, they can read about it and read about the program. And I'm hoping we're going to have a screening and a conversation in LA sometime soon. That's in the works, I hope, at USC.
You're going to let me know. You're going to let me know.
You will be the first. You'll be the fourth. And when we're out in LA, in any case, as we always do, we'll see you.
Norm, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much for taking the time.
What a delight to be with you both.
And if you guys have liked what you've heard or seen today, you can go and subscribe to us. And Morgan, where can they do that?
You can follow Two Bitches from Texas on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts.
I just wanted to see if she could say that.
Yes, I did. I could say it. And you can leave us a review. Let us know what you think.
And we give you all a big old sister hug.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.